Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to walk you through my entire home battery backup project, start to finish. This is not just a Pytes battery video, and it's not just a Sol Ark 18K video. They are coming later. I'm going to do standalone videos on each of those items in the future. What I want to do in this video is tell the full story of the project, why I decided to do it, how the equipment fits together, and what it actually costs. How I handled the install, and most importantly, what I learned along the way. If you're thinking about adding batteries to an existing solar system, especially if you're considering buying equipment yourself, instead of going through a turnkey installer for something like a Franklin or a Tesla, this video should give you a realistic picture of what the process looks like, what issues you might run into, and how you can kind of mitigate some of the issues you might run into. So let's start with the big picture. Why did I even do this? I already had an existing Enphase solar system on my house. It worked great during the day, but like most grid-tied systems, the moment power went out, the solar shut off. So during an outage, I had a roof full of solar panels that were basically useless. I wanted three main things: true whole home backup battery, true whole home backup power, the ability to keep using my solar during outages, and more control over how and when I use the grid power. A traditional generator would have been my backup, but I didn't want to deal with the fuel, the maintenance, the noise, or something that only works during emergencies. My neighbor absolutely hates the noise next to his house. My battery pump was going bad at one point, and it was kind of whining a little bit. And the first thing he came over to do after I moved into the neighborhood was complain about the noise from that. Or potentially we had this water tree in our backyard when we were doing our geothermal. It was pretty quiet. It was actually quieter than the compressor that was out there when we were replacing our geothermal system. And he also had to complain about that as well. So sound is a thing I'm definitely paying attention to, is to try to mitigate that noise. And there's nothing better for that than using something like a Sol Ark paired with battery as your whole home backup. Now, I am considering potentially getting a generator or something like a generator in the future, but that's way down the line. In any event, batteries gave me a cleaner, quieter, and more flexible solution. Before I get into the details, let me explain at a high level what I ended up installing. The core of the system is a Sol Ark 18K hybrid inverter, a bank of Pytes V5 batteries, a fusible 200 amp disconnect, a manual double throw bypass switch, and then integration with my existing Enphase system. The goal was to get from solar only, so I only had solar during the day or when the weather was pretty good, and that was it, to having grid power come into the house, solar charge the batteries, the Sol Ark manages everything, and I can use the batteries at night instead of running off the grid. That's the big picture goal that I was looking for. Next, let's talk a little bit about why I picked these specific items. I went with the Sol Ark 18K because it's the most powerful inverter that's out there right now. I also considered getting the FlexBoss 21 paired with the Grid Boss. In my opinion, those are the two top systems to consider, is the Sol Ark 18K and the FlexBoss 21 paired with the Grid Boss. Ultimately, I went with the Sol Ark because it was a little bit quieter. There's a couple videos out there where they took a sound meter and took a look at how loud the Sol Ark was in comparison to the EG4. I think it was an 18K maybe in the video that I remember the most, but sound was definitely a component of what I considered just based off of my neighbors and then the HOA and all the factors to consider for that. But then the other thing was just the sheer amount of power that the Sol Ark 18K provides. It's way more than anything else on the market right now. Plus, I watched a couple videos and it seemed like the Sol Ark was just built a little bit better, but I think that's a little bit subjective. There are tons of people that really love their EG4 products, and I definitely put a lot of thought, and I was actually leaning towards getting that all the way up until the Sol Ark 18K came out. As soon as the 18K came, it was a no-brainer for me to get the Sol Ark 18K. It checked all the boxes that I was looking for. For batteries, I chose the Pytes V5 because they offered a great cost per kilowatt hour. They're modular and expandable. They work well with the Sol Ark. It's one of the battery partners that Sol Ark pairs with, and they have a solid track record. Their failure rate is something like 0.01%. It's just ridiculously low, which makes it a great investment for long term. And also for the Pytes batteries, in comparison to most of the batteries I looked at, the charge and discharge rate was just phenomenally better on the Pytes. It's basically 75 amps for charge and discharge, which was an important factor with pairing with an 18K to make sure that I maximize the ability to actually provide that full 75 amps to the house that the 18K is capable of providing. Again, I'm going to go into more detail on all of this as part of my Pytes standalone video when I talk about exactly why I chose the batteries. But that was also a factor. Now, as you can see in the picture, I don't have a lot of wall space. I did put a lot of thought into getting the Franklin, especially when I got the solar initially installed. I was leaning entirely towards getting the Franklin when I got the solar installed, but I knew the Franklin was going to be getting an update and I couldn't wait that long to hold off on my solar. So I ended up not getting the Franklin, and it was actually a very good thing for me because it wouldn't have been sufficient for what I needed. I was kind of figuring out exactly how much energy I was going to need, and the amount of space that I would have needed to put something like a Tesla or an Enphase or a Franklin on my wall is ridiculous. My goal was to try to get somewhere between 80 and 120 kilowatt hours of capacity. Right now, I've only got 40 kilowatt hours with my current install, but I can expand it very easily. Rack batteries ended up being the only real option for my house at the time. Now, there are some other options out there, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the other options in a Pytes specific video later down the road. Now, one of the biggest decisions that I made was whether to buy everything myself or reach out to either my previous installer or a different installer to do the battery portion. And I did reach out to other options out there to see what was going to be best for me. Ultimately, I ended up just doing everything myself because I wanted to keep the cost down. I had to replace my HVAC and I switched it over to a geothermal system. That was an incredibly expensive process and quite the hit to my budget. So it's just a better solution for me to buy as much of it as I could and kind of plan out the entire installation. Plus, I would get to pick out exactly what I want. Now, hopefully I picked out all the right products, but I was pretty confident that I could pick out the right products, whether it was the disconnect or the double throw or the wireway. I knew that I didn't want just a standard galvanized box. I wanted something that would match my system and that was going to hold up a little bit longer. Now, looking at like a Franklin, for example, I could find places online where I could buy the batteries, and it was about $9,000 or $10,000 for a single Franklin battery. And then the A-gate was another $1,400-ish. To do the 80 to 120 kilowatt hours of capacity, we're talking almost $100,000. It's just ridiculous how much that system would have cost. Same thing with the Tesla. Now, I might be exaggerating a little bit, but not by much. Getting my current system with a Franklin would have been at least $40,000 to $50,000, and that's not including how much they would have quoted me for the actual installation, because that you really can't do yourself. It's a little bit harder to do that one. And most of the times, people just won't install it. Which leads me to my next topic of finding an electrician and what that process was. Now, I did something probably most people wouldn't do. I jumped on Yelp and said, hey, this is what I've got. Here's the list of all the components I've got. And I was looking for an electrician to do the installation. I got a ton of feedback on that. Some of it was, hey, we don't do that kind of stuff. Some of it was good. And some of it was like, okay, this is how much we're going to charge. One of the quotes was they charge by the day for an electrician. And it was like $900 a day for an electrician, plus any additional costs that they have to buy for conduit and wire and that kind of stuff. My highest quote was a little over $12,000 to do the installation, which was far higher than what I would have expected for the entire process. Now, my lowest quote was a little over $4,000. Now, the bulk of the quotes were in the $4,000 to $5,000 range. The $12,000 was definitely the outlier, but between electricians and actual whole home energy companies that focus on solar and batteries, I had pretty reasonable quotes in the $4,000 to $5,000 range, and that's roughly what I thought it should cost to do the installation. Now, of note for this one that I'm showing you here, I did have questions about the wording that was in here, but they did clarify that the intent was to do an install of everything that I provided, but there's a little bit of ambiguity about whether we would be using the disconnect that I bought or one that they recommended doing. So they didn't include some of that in here, but essentially it was the quote for the entire installation. Now, in the end, it ended up costing me $5,000 to hire somebody to do the installation. And that included everything. And it was basically over the course of 3 days to do the process of doing the installation. Now, the company that I hired actually had experience with doing Sol Ark installations using the wireways and had worked with Pytes batteries before. Plus, they had experience working with my span panel. So they essentially had everything that I was looking for. It ended up being a little bit more. As I showed you, the best quote I got was around $4,600. So I ended up paying $400 more for an experience level. The other companies didn't have experience specifically with Sol Arks, or they didn't have any experience with Pytes, which I wasn't too worried about not having experience with the Pytes because they're pretty much easy to do. And I'd already done all the setup for that anyway. It was really just mounting the stuff on the wall, running the wire, and the conduit. That's essentially what I was looking for help with. I don't really have a lot of help around the house for lifting heavy stuff up on the wall, so the idea of getting that wireway mounted or the Sol Ark at 150 plus pounds, I didn't consider it completely feasible to actually accomplish that on my own. So what were some of the challenges that I had? Well, to be honest, the most difficult portion of the entire process was trying to find an electrician to do the work. Now, I did get a bunch of quotes, but I got a lot of people that said, we don't do that. And then I had a couple people that showed up to do the quotes and said, yeah, we don't do that. And I was a little surprised because it was really just a lot of standard electrical work, mounting the disconnect, mounting the double throw, the wireway, The Sol Ark is the only part of the system that wasn't necessarily standard, but it is standard electrical diagrams and processes of actually hooking things up. So I didn't really see where the issue was. My solar is already on the roof, but there definitely does seem to be some sort of a reluctance for your standard electricians that fix things around your house to do this kind of work. So you might run into that in your area. Now, fortunately, the company that I went with, like I said, had experience with everything, and the installer that I went with was actually on the Sol Ark's website. Now, if you didn't know this, you can go to Sol Ark, and they'll have a list of installers near you that you can check and see, as well as whether they're silver or gold. The quality was really good. They really did a great job on the installation, so I'm not exactly sure what goes into deciding whether they're silver or gold or some other level, but your experience might vary depending on a lot of different factors. So my recommendation is to reach out and get a sense for how experienced the installer actually is before you make a decision just based on them being on this portal. Another issue that I ran into was actually with the Enphase system. Now, I'm not entirely sure that it's fixed. Time will tell. I'll have to keep an eye on it, but I do get an error every once in a while from the Enphase app about too much energy going back to the grid. Now, at the time that I'm creating this video, I've got a ton of snow on my roof, so my solar's not really producing a lot right now, but essentially the Enphase app was saying that I was producing less solar than I was actually feeding to the grid, which is possible because the batteries could have been sending something to the grid. I haven't seen that error pop up since, but right now I'm getting low production errors from the Enphase app anyway, and I think that one's taking priority over any others. We did identify that in the process of changing out the bonding and the grounds and the neutrals inside of my span panel, the CTs were reversed, and I think that might have been causing some of the problems. So when we reversed those, I think that might have resolved the problem. Again, I haven't seen that error since. Now, my system is really new, so I don't have a lot of actual experience with it, but I have had to call Sol Ark a couple times trying to get everything set up, and they've been great. Now, I haven't tried to call them after hours, so I don't know how their experience will be outside of normal working hours, but when I've called them, they've answered everything right away. So I was having some problems with trying to charge my batteries because right now, again, I don't have a lot of solar production, so I wanted to use the grid during the day to charge the batteries and then use the batteries at night. And essentially, that's my goal anyway. Ideally, I'd be using solar to charge those batteries, but right now, again, I'm not producing a lot of solar because it's covered in a lot of ice and snow. But I can tell you so far, my experience with the app has been really good. It isn't necessarily intuitive, so I've actually spent a lot of time talking to Sol Ark about trying to get everything all set up and taking some notes on where we are in the app, what everything is meaning, and how to actually use it. I looked through the installation manual, but I didn't find it intuitive, which seems to align with a lot of video reviews that I've watched on the Sol Ark product. I'm pretty sure this is just my learning curve as I learn the ins and outs of that application. I will be doing videos in the future where I actually take a look at the app and then look at some of the data that's in there, how I've read it, and kind of an update on my experience in understanding that app once I get a little bit better with it. Now, the other question that a lot of you might be asking is, what about the county? Now, I always do permits for everything, and this was no exception. And I've gotten pretty good at doing the permit process. It's actually a web version that we have here in my area, and it's really easy to use. But I wasn't sure, do I need the engineering plans? I remember for my solar project, I did hire a solar installation company, and we got these really detailed engineering plans. And I did reach out to a couple different people that offered to do the engineering plans for about $1,800 to $2,200. And I kept wondering, do I really need this? If I do the entire permit process myself, do I actually need that? And the answer was no, I didn't need it. Now, I did put together some diagrams, and I'll show what those kind of look like here. I provided this, and I did do the entire permit process myself. At no time did they ask me for engineering diagrams. Essentially, this is all I provided, and the permit got through without any problems in my area. Now, that might not work for all of your areas. I would recommend reaching out and asking the question inside the area that you live. But I can tell you that that was definitely something I was concerned about because I didn't really budget to do engineering plans, and I didn't really see the need for it. I can understand doing those for your solar where load could potentially be an issue, the weight on the roof, if you've got an older roof. So there's a lot of factors that go into it when you're putting something on your roof. I didn't see those applying to doing a battery system for my house. And fortunately for me, they agreed and there wasn't a requirement to actually do that. I hope this gives you a realistic expectation of what the project looks like, how much the cost was, and some of the things that went into the project for me. If you have any questions about anything that I covered in this video, drop them in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them in future content. Now, don't forget, if you like this kind of content, hit that like and subscribe button. It really does help the channel grow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.